Project Hail Mary, a new movie adapted from Andy Weir's best-selling novel, is essentially unfixable. And I'm here to tell you why that is and if it even matters. Hi, I'm Jakob, and I sometimes antagonize people online for no good reason, and I suppose this may be one of those days. But before we continue, do all the YouTube things. Like, comment, subscribe, share, do all the things. And check out my website, flashonfilm.com, where I write. Check out my podcast, Uncut Gems Podcast, where I talk about movies. And, stick around for more weird takes on movies that you may or may not like. So basics first. What is Project Hail Mary? So, a brand new, call it hard science fiction movie adapted from Andy Weir's 2021 best-selling novel, which is his third novel after The Martian and Artemis. So the movie stars Ryan Gosling, James Ortiz, who's he has a voice role because he voices Rocky, which is Ryan Gosling's space spider companion, which in the book was kept a bit of a surprise, and in the movie they kind of decided to make it part of the marketing. You tell me. Sandra Hüller, a few other people. So it's directed by Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who did the Lego Movie and 21 and 22 Jump Street, and then probably most recently most known for having written and co-produced the Spider-Verse series, so the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Across the Spider-Verse, and the third one. And they were also famously fired from the production of Solo, a Star Wars story by Kathleen Kennedy, which is a story for a different day. Importantly, the movie is written by Drew Goddard, who's prominent sort of Hollywood screenwriter responsible for shows like Buffy, Angel, Alias, and Lost. I mean, he wrote on those shows. But he also wrote Cloverfield, World War Z, or Z, and he also wrote and directed Cabin in the Woods, among other things. But what matters here is that he previously wrote The Martian, so another adaptation of Andy Weir's writing that was adapted or was directed by Ridley Scott. Right, so what is this movie about? And why do I have a problem with it? So the movie is about an astronaut who wakes up in deep space and has to figure out using logic, good old-fashioned logic, why he's there, because he has amnesia. And once he does it, he has to figure out how to solve the problem of why he was put in this position, which is the world's dying and he was sent on a Hail Mary mission to understand what's going on and fix the problem. Like, if you haven't seen the movie, the whole idea is that the sun is slowly dimming, and it's because there is this sort of interstellar microbial alien life form that sucks the energy out of the sun. And as it turns out, Ryland Gray, so that's Ryan Gosling, is kind of like one of those scientists, or he's a high school teacher, former scientist who's recruited into sort of like a task force to figure out what the hell's going on, reasons unknown. I mean, there's a whole conversation of on sort of Andy Weir's sort of character building, which I think is a matter for a separate video. But I promised myself I'll be a bit more precise this time. And this is where you look at the timer, and if it's over 20 minutes long, that means I have failed. The idea is there's this alien life form called astrophage, which is eating the sun, and Ryan Gosling is sent with a crew of astronauts on a suicide mission to a solar system 12 light years away to figure out what the hell's going on and send information back to Earth so that people could hopefully fix it in time. And it's all well and good, like the whole concept of this of this story of a guy wakes up in space and has to science the shit out of everything to solve all the problems that life throws at him. That's all good, but it has some inherent problems, like innate to the story, that realistically cannot be fixed when you're trying to adapt it into a film. So first of all, before I actually start taking this thing apart, so what is the appeal of Project Hail Mary as a film or as a book? Like, first of all, like the book was sold, and this is something that Andy Weir has really placed strong emphasis on as a writer, and that's something that he has done all throughout his writing career. This is one of his sort of go-to babies, is the adherence to scientific veracity. So the books he writes, I think they're written so that so that Neil deGrasse Tyson wouldn't be able to like poke holes through it. So like orbital mechanics make sense, like in a fundamental sense, physics has to make sense, chemistry has to make sense, biology has to make sense. It's all kind of rooted in very sort of fundamental scientific understanding of the universe, and that's a good grounding for any sort of hard science fiction story. But this is kind of what his books have always been sold on, the idea of like a guy stranded on Mars and he has to figure out how to get back home without using magic, essentially, right? Another sort of piece of appeal, and this is again indispensable. Like you take rewind back a few seconds. Like the elements of the appeal of the film or the story would be elements that if you took them out, you'd risk undermining the idea of adapting the source material. So if you take the scientific veracity, are you still adapting an Andy Weir book? If you take another one of these, which is problem solving, logic-based problem solving, where you have a character trying to like scratch his head and again science the shit out of everything. If you take this away, then would you still be adapting an Andy Weir book? The answer is no, right? And the third part of it is what I call like the in media res vicarious drama, which is provided in the book by the sort of ongoing stream of consciousness narration, first person narration that Andy Weir provides for his character, where he explains what he's doing step by step, so that he would take you on a journey, like onto his shoulder, so that you can understand what the hell's happening and just be part of the drama together with him, right? So you're constantly in the guy's head. And why is this a problem? Well, it's not really, because like realistically, in isolation, it isn't, right? It's a great way to sort of build a narrative that's going to be compelling, intriguing, and will allow the viewer or the reader sort of like a sense of feeling smarter than they may even be, because the scientific concepts are broken down in a very approachable way. Again, this is a story for a different day. And the problem solving is kind of written in a way that it looks simple, but it kind of isn't. As in, like, all the aha moments are kind of coming out of logical sort of strains of actions and like problems, questions, solutions, and consequences. And that's kind of like the appeal of it. You always feel like you're just this close to figuring it out yourself, but you're not, because the protagonist is always like a step ahead of you. But that's kind of the driving force of it. That kind of gives you this sort of good enough momentum, I think, right? And where's the problem with it? Well, the problem is simple. We've already seen a movie like this, exactly like this. That's exactly what The Martian was. A guy stranded in the middle of nowhere like on a different planet has to figure out how to get back home, or like get in contact with Earth and just figure out how to get people to send a rescue mission after him and survive in an inhospitable alien environment, right? So if you do that, as in like if you take the book and adapt it exactly as is, which is with the adherence to the sort of first-person narration, which almost lends itself to the idea to what Matt Damon in the Martian film would do, which was actually speaking into the camera in recording video journals. If you do that, then you'd make this movie look exactly like The Martian, only with some some elements of garnish on the side being different, and with a space spider sort of becoming a sidekick, which is kind of like the divergence point, or the point of differentiation for this film. So that, like, if you're talking about Andy Weir's books, which is like, which one are we talking about? The one with the spider without, or the one without it, right? So they looked at this book, I think, Drew Goddard. And by the way, this is where the problem kind of comes into play, because a guy writes an adaptation of this, Drew Goddard that is, of The Martian, and then comes back to write this. And if they adapt the book exactly as is, the accusation would be that the guy's actually just done the same job twice. It's just they've renamed all the characters and just changed a few things on the sides, and that would be it. And is that enough? Probably it isn't. So like you can already see that you can't really take the book and adapt it on face value. So you have to make changes. And they actually do make changes to the narrative. They actually go and take Andy Weir's book and they try to identify what they need to keep and what they can jettison. So what they do in terms of this sort of this screenplay surgery is they understand that, well, we can't remove the problem solving because that is the core of the text. but we can't really keep the narration, because if you keep the sort of video journal style narration all throughout the film, the way The Martian was kind of built, then the comparison will be inescapable. You can't really run away from it. So they kept it to a minimum, mostly for comedic effects, so that like you get these weird comments from Ryan Gosling, who's like carrying this movie, by the way, because he has enough charisma and sort of he is very light on his feet, and he can take these predicaments and turn them into something that I think in the book also was just like coming across as a little bit more lighthearted than probably would have let's just say, a serious science fiction environment, right? But in doing so, what they do remove is the process of problem solving. So what we have is a string of problems that this book is kind of just laying in front of the character. Say, find out where we are, figure out, do some calculations, do whatever, and see, oh, this is not the sun I'm looking at a different star and whatever. Or something's happening, we are losing thrust, therefore I have to go into my narration mode and figure out how to fix whatever's gone wrong. And then we have a solution, or I don't know, we're finding a solution to the big problem of the movie, which is like how to fix this alien life form. Okay, so we do X, Y, and Z. I don't want to spoil too much, and then come up with a solution. But it takes a while, and you're part of this process in the book. And by removing that, you're essentially just turning hard science fiction into magical science fiction. And I'm not sure if this is something that Andy Weir as an author was actually gunning for, as a because as a result, if you haven't read the book and you watch the film, would be like, well, you'd feel like, I don't know, like I'm just not party to any conversation. There's these two people, I mean, one person, one space spider, who just, I don't know, learn how to communicate like this, which in the book also takes a little while, and they come up with solutions to problems that I don't necessarily understand. They have aha moments, and I have to go like, that's great, that's very nice. And then before you can even ask a follow-up questions of like, by the way, how did you come up with this? Oh, and then there's another problem, because the whole story is kind of assembled using the and then sort of logic, as in we're solving a problem, we create another one by solving the first one, and then another thing happens. And then even when we've solved everything, we can't logically kind of tie anything into creating a new problem. Then something will come out of the blue and just ruin the day once more. That's kind of like how the story is assembled, right? Like, because we see Grace, so Ryland Grace, come up with these solutions magically, because we don't know anything about the sort of, like, we don't hear anything about the science of what's happening. If you read the book, you'll see some elements of the text somewhere just sprinkled throughout, just to keep you invested. And it's like, oh, we haven't really totally abandoned the text. But if you haven't, what you have is just magic, as in a guy sees a problem, magic, solution. Rinse, repeat, right? Which gives us an illusion of tension. Like you just sit there and you think to yourself, wow, this guy's super smart. I bet he has all the bases covered. There's nothing he cannot solve. Therefore, the urgency drops to zero, because we have this sort of problem process solution becoming problem quip solution via magic. What we have then is just Deus ex machina, all throughout the movie, right? And it's just difficult to engage, because we essentially have this guy who's, like MacGyver on steroids, right? So, at least, as I said, like at least to avoid the direct comparison with The Martian, they gave him a spider sidekick. So that's good. But then, if we can't have this, because you can't have Martian 2.0, and you have to make these choices that effectively take the hard out of hard science fiction and put it and soften it so much that you essentially end up with fantasy, what else do you have to latch onto? And is this enough, right? What you can have in a movie like this would be stakes, spectacle, and a character drama, right? When it comes to stakes, this is where we actually once again come back to Andy Weir and my own personal problem, my own personal pet peeves with how he writes and how he kind of treats world building, because he specifically insists on just being on his adherence to scientific sort of verisimilitude and the problem-solving porn, the competence fantasy. When it comes to stakes, which is the Earth is dying, we're here to solve a problem so that there's some urgency to what we need to achieve, because like we've traveled this far and it took this long, therefore we can't we can't waste any time, because by the time everything's kind of calculated in the book so that like it will take X amount of years, so it will be just about enough for people to do something about it without like more than half of the planet dying or something like that. But it's all kind of related in like, oh, by the way, this is gonna happen. And in the movie you kind of have a similar problem, because we barely sort of hear and care about what's going to happen to the planet. It's almost like watching Armageddon without having these sort of sequences of like Paris being vaporized by a meteor. Stakes are kind of inexistent. We don't necessarily care about any of this because we're supposed to be caring about problem solving. That's what Andy Weir's sort of MO was. But because we can't really focus on the problem solving, then the stakes are kind of underdeveloped. So we almost forget the Earth exists for the most part. I mean, we are reminded about Earth because the movie flashes back to certain scenes, specifically to stage logical solutions that happen later on, if that makes any sense. Like if Grace has to remember, oh, this is how I used to do something in the past, then we'll show a scene that foreshadows it right before that happens, right? But we don't necessarily care about rising, I don't know, about sort of strife on Earth, or like the planet cooling down and what they do to save it and whatever. It's no discussion about any of this. There's no time. The movie is like 2.5 hours long. So another thing that you can latch onto, really. So stakes probably doesn't really matter in here. Spectacle. That's probably realistically, that's where this movie shines, because you kind of have this is the most tactile sort of part of this movie, because you have great visuals, and this is just objectively, like I'm watching this movie and I feel like everyone's just having a great fun with this, because they kind of get off on the competence side of things, and I'm like, why? Great visuals is kind of what's driving this film for me, really. Some scenes are genuinely awe-inspiring, and this is actually where the movie transcends Weir's writing, because Weir's, like, as the sort of spectacle happens, Weir's just obsessed with numbers. He's just like, is the angle correct on the thrusters so that we can make sure that this spectacle actually makes logical sense. Meanwhile, sometimes it's almost a good idea to just let some of the explanations go. And this is where, because the movie lets go of these explanations, then we just have these brief moments of just existing in the moment with people just trying not to die in space, which is great. And there are some genuinely interesting visual moments when, like, I don't know, Grace is flying through like a field of these astrophage sort of microbes, and we see this in IR or whatever, but we don't know that we see it in IR. This is kind of like where the book would insist on telling me this is in IR, and everything just looks beautiful in purple, right? That's great. This is something that you almost don't even have in the book, or whenever it's in the book, you don't pay attention, because again, the author just pays attention to why it's great, because there is a physical effect somewhere, right? So that's the main driver in the movie, right? That you need to, for you to latch onto. Another one would be character drama, and this is kind of, again, like one of my problems. Again, I'll come back to it, I promise, on a separate occasion, because Weir writes characters that Michael Bay would love to direct, like broad strokes, stereotypes. But even a broad arc can work. Like you have in here, because underneath all of the sort of problem solving and all this nonsense, you have a very simple sort of story about a guy who's essentially turning from a coward to a hero, right? It's just, the problem is, like, because we don't have the narration, we actually don't even know that they had to remove certain scenes as well, but we don't know why certain things that he does are either dangerous or ill-advised or whatever, but the transition nevertheless exists, right? It's just, the problem is it kind of comes into action like 3/4 through the films. Like by that time, I'm like sitting here, like, I don't know, 1 hour and 50, I'm saying, can we go home now? You know? Because like the movie's actively fighting against me. They're trying to get me on board with believing magic while insisting that what they're serving is hard science fiction. And the only reason I know that's the truth is because I read the book, right? So what else can I latch onto? Like, character drama is very simple. Spectacle is the only thing that really matters, and stakes don't exist. And the fourth one, I suppose, that people kind of latch onto, I suppose, by and large, would be, oh, it's just vibes. It's so nice because these characters are nice. And like they're all very positive. It's like Bill and Ted, really. But as a result, like you don't really have like you don't have this classical friction or tension between characters. There's no villains, anti-heroes. There's no stakes of that nature. There's no urgency of any kind. You just look at people, solve problems, and just be nice to each other. It's like Mormon science fiction. It's very odd. Is this enough? Like, is spectacle, like beautiful visuals and sort of tactile, practical sort of character design and special effects, is this enough? Is the character drama, very broad character drama, enough? Is the idea that we don't even think about what's happening on Earth enough? So I don't think so. Like this, for me, this barely sways my sort of rating on this film towards the positive, because the movie is kind of like just, as I said, unfixable, and it is more or less Andy Weir's fault. So the movie is kind of painted into a corner by an author who's forcing people, so the screenwriter, to choose between either being a clone of The Martian and risk being labeled as such, or inventing drama and spectacle where there wasn't really any to begin with, because the book is very sparse in that regard. And in doing so, it might alienate the viewers who did read the book, right? Because without prior knowledge, like everything will come out of nowhere. Like using Deus Ex Machina magic, fantasy, right? And those who read the book might even think like, why are we overlooking so many cool things that I found cool while reading? So there's so much cool detail that you've overlooked. Like, hey, the space spider lives in like an atmosphere of 29 bar of ammonia, and that actually creates a problem for Ryland Grace to solve at one point, and just puts him in harm's way, and adds just a little notch to the belt of, hey, this guy's changing from a coward to a hero because he's risking his own well-being and his own life to save an alien life form that he barely met, right? But it's this kind of sideline because you can't really go into that detail because you've already agreed that you're not going to be indulging in the narration where the problem solving is effectively sort of encapsulated, right? So what does it mean? Like, it really means that in an ideal world, with everything else being equal, you can either have a really good, faithful adaptation of The Martian or Project Hail Mary, but not both. So yeah, let me know what you think. Leave a comment, and as I said, like, follow, share, subscribe, and see you on the next one.